Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in this debate. And I reflect upon some of the values and standards that I was taught in the service. And one of the fundamental ones, I think, was really that the notion that credible leadership is derived by serving others and serving the interests, particularly of those that you do lead. And I think this House could demonstrate its leadership and its credibility in the leadership of our armed forces by ensuring that our service personnel do have the adequate remuneration that reflects the nature of their service and dedication to our country. And when we consider that 33% of service personnel that's the only share who are satisfied with the basic rate of pay, it's clear that there is a dissatisfaction. And I find it a rather ill-observed point, that just because it's not the primary driver of someone's behaviour in terms of their career development, it is not an important one and not worthy of discussion in this House. I think it is very worthy of discussion in this House, and I would repudiate those sentiments utterly. There has also been further reference that the X factor of incremental pay, which reflects the nature of the antisocial sort of career service of regular forces, makes up for that fall off and restraint on pay, but it doesn't, because only a quarter of the personnel surveyed think that it is sufficient for the compensation to the disruption it causes to their lives. And I think that's a key thing we should bear in mind, that the X factor isn't so much an X factor at all. I would also say that one of the interesting observations about service pay is, of course, has been made a point across the House, is the great opportunity for career development that service in the armed forces does bring, and particularly to young people. I would say one of the great advantages of serving in the armed forces is actually the lower increment for a minimum wage doesn't apply when you join the armed forces, and I think it would be great if the Scottish National Party could also reflect that sentiment in ensuring that we do continue to extend the opportunity to serve in our armed forces to 16 and 17-year-olds going forward. I would give way to the honourable gentleman on that point.
Well, he makes reference to, I think he makes reference to a recent debate and policy change at my party conference, but I'm sure he'd want to note when he gets to his feet that I argued against that change in policy.
For that intervention, and it's reassuring indeed that the spokesperson for the SNP on defence matters still continues to uphold the principle that young people should be allowed to join our armed forces and develop their careers in the service. I think that's most welcome. But I would also refer to the fact that even at the lowest basic rate of pay, when you consider a service person on 24-hour deployment on exercise or on operations, their basic pay and an hourly rate could actually go down to a notional value of just £2 per hour. Is that really the value we place in our armed forces when they're dedicated to that extent? I mean, when we're continuing to remove the increments that are associated with overseas service, I think that is totally unacceptable, and we should bear that in mind when we consider appropriate rates of pay for armed forces. We talk about the great opportunity that a career in the service provides, particularly in terms of skills development, apprenticeships, trade opportunities for service personnel. Well, I'll give way on that point.
You've already spoken there. The honourable gentleman is making a very, very good point about career prospects and the package. Why wasn't it in the Labour motion? Because many of us would have agreed exactly in what he's talking about.
Well, we're making the point that just by virtue of the fact that we have that great opportunity for development, it makes those very people very attractive to the private sector. And that's why we're seeing, particularly when inflation picks up and the private sector's salaries respond to that, we're going to see increasing pressure on retention in the service if that continues to lag behind the private sector. And that's why we need to have that situation addressed urgently if we're going to continue to make our armed forces capable. Yes.
I thank the honourable for giving way. In Plymouth, we're already seeing some of the engineering grades, in particular, being poached by the private sector, and pay is one of the reasons why they are leaving the armed services to work in the private sector. Would the honourable friend agree with that? Yes,
I absolutely agree with that, and particularly of note is areas where there's engineering or aircrew. There are particular areas of urgent issue of undermanning in the service. I would actually say it's particularly alarming to note that the entire regular army can now be comfortably seated in Wembley Stadium now that it's fallen under 82,000 and is 6% undermanned, in contrast to when I joined in 2006 when it was 103,000 and you couldn't fit it into Wembley Stadium. But not only that, we've seen the defence budget fall from 2.5% of GDP to under 2% over the term of this Tory government, and also a chaotic equipment programme, whether it's Nimrod or whether it's the cats and traps on the carriers. There's been fiasco after fiasco that's bled resources out of the armed forces through lack of efficient management of equipment programmes, and it's shocking that armed forces pay should suffer as a result of that. We've seen also reference that Yes, I'm happy to give way on that.
Apologies. I just wanted to give the opportunity for the honourable gentleman to correct what he just said, because it was the Labour government that chose to abandon cats and traps. It was the Labour government that slowed down the building of the aircraft carrier, which cost over £1 billion on top of the original bill. That's what happened to the aircraft carrier under a Labour government.
To correct the right honourable gentleman, that is actually factually incorrect, because I worked at BAE Systems at the time, and it was a result of the 2010 Defence and Security Review that was commissioned, and that whole project was £1 billion utterly wasted, actually, before it was cancelled on much ignominy. I would make the point, just to quickly draw my comments to a conclusion, that the Armed Forces Peer Review Board has actually highlighted the 2016-17 peer review was not an increase in real terms at all, because of the impact of national insurance increases and also the changes to housing cost allowances. And actually, from 2010 to present, it represents a 5.3% cut in real terms pay for our armed forces. That is unacceptable. The reality is borne out by the evidence presented today. I feel it's comprehensive. We have seen a litany of failure. We have seen falling expenditure. We have seen stagnating incomes. That leads to a fall in morale, and as a result, outflow has exceeded recruitment since 2011. Let us please come together in this House today to recognise that we have a vicious cycle today of downsizing, and can we move it towards a virtuous cycle of investment that will stop the continued degradation of our armed forces and ensure that the operational effectiveness of our armed forces is secure for the future in a very dangerous world. Thank you very much.